Welcome to episode 47 of New Indian Woman podcast, airing first in early August 2021, and I'm your host Krishna. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Mohnish Sinha, and a very special episode relevant for women employed in any sector, especially in India. Mohnish is a partner and leader diversity and inclusion at Deloitte India. He has over 25 years of experience in organizational transformation, leadership development, coaching, and setting up and assessing learning functions. Mohnish is also a part of Society for Human Resource Management India's panel of subject matter experts on executive coaching and leadership. In short, what does this intro mean? I will translate this into simpler words. Mohnish can influence the work culture not just in his organization in India with more than 15,000 employees, but influence other HR practices across other organizations. Listeners, you would remember we had an earlier episode on challenges women face at workplace, and this is more like interacting from an organization's perspective as to what's happening there. Mohnish, welcome to the New Indian Woman podcast. By the way, let me tell you that in almost 2 years of this podcast, you are the first male guest.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be the first male guest, and I'm delighted to be on your podcast, Krishna. Thank you for
Thanks,
inviting me.
Mohnish. So, listeners, what we will do today is we start off with sharing the results from a survey published by Deloitte in the context of gender lens in Indian organizations. This survey, it's very interesting. It is titled Women at Work, a Global Outlook. We will share this particular survey as part of the show notes of this episode as well. I will try to summarize my understanding of the reading and then would invite Mr. Mohnish also. The survey says employers can support women and create more high trust, inclusive cultures during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, the global survey finds that 51% of women are less optimistic about their career prospects right now than before the pandemic. The most important point shared by Mohnish in this report is that it is not enough to define policies to change the experience of women at workplace. There is a need for mindset and culture change. There is a need to encourage flexibility of all kinds, especially in work hours and in terms of respecting boundaries around work hours. The survey itself reached out to 5,000 women across 10 countries. Women indicated that they are more stressed and discouraged since the pandemic began as they take on an increasing amount of responsibility at home and in their careers. Women continue to face a broad range of non inclusive behaviors without adequate support from their direct managers and employers. This, despite the fact that increasingly employers are having more and more policies and mechanisms for reporting bias, discrimination, etc. And this leads to a huge impact on women's physical, mental health, and career ambitions. And this is the details of the report are very interesting. Please do read the report. But overall, what I found very interesting and actually disturbing is that on every single parameter, the percentage of women in India facing this problem is more than their counterparts across the world. For example, one parameter, 26% of Indian women who participated in the survey have considered leaving the workforce after the pandemic began, as compared to 23% worldwide. So, what does this mean? The pandemic numbers by itself, it's quite revealing. But the other thought is, aren't these known facts? Are we supposed to find, as women, are we supposed to find consolation in the fact that more people are facing this challenge that each one of us is individually facing, not just in India, but across the world? I personally feel happy about such a survey and report by a reputed organization. It kind of gives legitimacy to the problem, which has always been discussed about by women amongst her friends. And I feel that is the first point where change can begin. So, Mohnish, thanks for your organization for conducting the survey and initiating discussions around this topic. So, would you like to talk more about some of these numbers? Do you want to highlight any other aspect of the survey that I may have missed out, and especially in the Indian context?
Sure. You actually use the word disturbing, and indeed, that's what the survey actually revealed. And disturbing about something that we always knew at the back of our minds, right? There has been study globally done over the years, and few things that has always come up in these studies is one that men typically do not take as much of the burden of household chores as much as women do across the cultures, right? It's not just
Hmm.
India. Men in India usually tend to do worse off, and this we've always known. Pandemic was a crisis that actually created a sense of challenge, deepened the sense of challenge for everyone, men
Hmm.
and women alike. But given that women already created a role that was constantly feeling responsible for work at home, looking after, being a caregiver, looking after children, as well as being responsible employees. In a time like this, it just went. The pressure just went through the roof, and we've been seeing qualitative, data that coming out from various organizations. And so survey really confirmed that severity of situation, built on the back of an ages long tradition, if you like, where women have constantly had to take the tougher end of the stick. But this report pointed out some very sharp elements of what's really going on, right? So first is the fact that organizations had begun to respond to the fact that women and men, they need flexibility of time, and certainly women do. And they rolled out practices around giving flexibility to women. However, in an environment in a pandemic, women actually did not find that helpful enough, and the reason was that they were in a perfect storm, if I couldn't call it that. They were in a perfect storm because at one end, the demand at work had gone up simply because the nature of the environment was that everybody was, you are basically living from a calendar to a calendar invite, and
Right.
therefore she was just sort of going through one invite and one area of work to the other, and no beginning and the end in effect, and we all know this. While the demand at work had gone at home had gone up because now the whole family is together. If they have children, if she's caring about a loved one or a parent or someone, all that is happening in a small space of whatever the area of home that might be. And as a consequence, we saw her getting slowly and slowly isolated, right? So the quality of relationship with her spouse went down. Relationships like friends became less and less available. She found less and less time to engage in her own hobbies and things that gave her joy and a me time, as we typically call it. So all that time went on. The only thing, probably, I mean, if there is a positive that women reported, was the fact that they had a higher quality time with their children, and
Hmm.
and that's the home front, right? So it's getting squeezed and getting more and more alone. And on the work front, the demand at work meant that they had very little time to really work out and resolve their personal space, but also compete in that new virtual environment. So therefore, few things that got hit. One was her motivation. The motivation is worse off twice over than what it used to be naturally. The level of stress twice over than what it used to be naturally, right? In pre-COVID times, pre-pandemic times. The confidence in the ability to continue working on a career went down again significantly. And all the policies that companies had, particularly around flex policies, they found that they could not really enjoy that flex policy simply because companies tended to sort of reach or react to that policy, or people who took that policy with a sense of that really you're not doing the main work, you're not really serious about your career, and therefore we'll just give you some things on the side and not the mainstream work. So therefore she started feeling more and more isolated. isolated even at work. So net, this whole thing has caused a very strong and deep sort of a mental isolation and mental stress, which women have reported across the world, and in India has been that much more. I'll pause here, and I'm sure you have some specific questions you want to type.
I feel what you are conveying, the kind of additional stress, it's very visible for a layperson in terms of calls. I always wonder, what about the guys participating in these calls? Why am I not listening to toddler noise around them?
Right,
Okay, but when women are there in the calls, most often you hear, and it is very visible that they are trying to manage both work and home, because they have to do the childcare also while they are doing the work from home.
right,
It was a very practical manifestation of what this survey is talking about. All of us have listened to these calls where
right.
women struggle, and you can hear sounds of vessels, you can hear sounds of cooker going,
Yeah.
and most
So
often than
indeed,
not, we don't hear it when it is men talking. But they are also from similar families, everybody cooped up with young children in the house.
right.
But there is a marked difference.
There is, and anything socially conditioned over centuries, really, right? So
Correct, correct.
we don't even realize it's so subconscious.
Yeah, true. Additional point is this particular survey focuses, I would assume it is on the knowledge worker sector.
Yes, it is. It is knowledge worker.
Yeah,
Yes,
so to that extent, it is the top creamy layer amongst the organized sectors, right? We are not even touching upon women in other sectors. So
right.
we are talking about the educated woman
Yeah,
who is working with a laptop, connecting from calls,
yeah,
which is maybe less than 5% of women workforce in India. I have no idea of the numbers, but I know it's a very small number. So,
yeah.
and there itself, the problem is so visible. So, we can imagine how it is across.
Yeah. In fact, just as the profile of people, you're absolutely right. It covered people right at the CXO level down to an executive at an entry level. So it covered the entire gamut
Right.
of levels that women would operate at. And you're so right. I mean, this is the set of women we normally don't think, in quotes, that they would have any issues, right?
So, it's very important that while the survey relates to this percentage, but it's very important to look at this percentage because it is the aspirational set for the entire population of the country, where a large number of women are getting educated and they are inching closer to this, becoming part of this.
Yeah.
So, Monish, based on the survey, what do you think are the topmost actions any organization should implement to facilitate equal work experiences? And I'm very particular about work experiences for women and not just work opportunities.
Right, right. That's a great question, and that's a real question. I think we should all think about as we have started speaking with organizations in India, and a few things that we see is that immediate action for companies. A positive in India, which I should have highlighted. One is that women in India reported that they had a lot more check-ins with their managers. So managers looked out for them, called them to see how they're doing on a regular basis, much more than say the counterparts in the rest of the world. And women really valued it. So that was one very, very positive thing. I think the one thing that we could do more of is continue the strengthening the check-ins, because just looking out for each other is a vital step, right? Just acknowledging that, look, here is a problem, and maybe there is something the manager can do to make things easier, or certainly be mindful of the fact that here is a colleague going through a challenge. Maybe we should think about our time utilization and things like that. So that is certainly we should continue doing. But one
Right.
area that I certainly think is an area, a time for companies to think about, is one of the strongest weapons, if you like, of creating positivity or a positive environment for women who are struggling with stretched time, both ends, has been this idea of providing flex opportunity or flexible policies to women. Now, it's in hindsight, it looks the issues look quite straightforward. That the fact that when women take these policies, in general, they feel that they're not treated well. because they are seen as someone who's off the mainstream work, and therefore never a good career option. So the big question is, how can companies make these flexible policies really work, really make it operate? And this goes to the heart of the ways of working of a company, right?
Right.
Again, and I would pick on another of these historical biases that we always had. So, for example, in the workplaces, and this is not just India, every part of the world, is that hard work meant long hours, right?
Right.
If you are not putting in long hours, you are hardly working. I mean, that was
Yeah.
the philosophy. My generation, when I started work, 25, 30 years ago, that was the value, right? you
Yes.
slogged, and therefore your manager said, good work.
And I remember as a woman, I have felt guilty every time I was stepping out because
Right.
most of the men folks stayed back.
Exactly.
I would have finished what I wanted to do, but I still felt bad. The
Yeah.
ability to stay back was valued and is valued so much more.
Exactly, and that is the challenge, right? That the assumption that if I work longer, I am more effective as a employee, and therefore my performance is better, is an deeply erroneous judgment.
Right.
We know, and it doesn't even take research to point out, but there is research to point out that really a focused work done in quietude yields better results than twiddling your thumbs and really pushing your pencil and paper or laptop these days, or over longer hours. So efficiency comes from focus and attention, and really has got nothing to do with long hours. But this is so deeply embedded that the
Yeah.
performance systems in organizations have kind of calibrated for that. Even though I can bet you that no organization, I can say with reasonable confidence that no organization in India would go around saying, I give marks for long hours working, right? Nobody has.
Right.
But
Correct.
as employees, we tend to take that, and therefore, when somebody is given flex, the unconscious bias kicking in is saying, oh, this person is not putting as much time, therefore she's not committed, right? And therefore, we should give her something light to do, something not mainstream. And if the woman colleague does not do mainstream work, how would she be able to raise her hand and to be ready for big positions? Because we learn on real tough and real work, right? So if we don't get those opportunities, we don't grow, right? So I think that's so rethinking on this policy, and in rethinking the policy, so application of this policy means changing the ways of working, particularly calling out this unconscious bias of long hours equal to better employee, role modeling. So the leaders and organizations have to role model this new ways of working. I mean, I know of companies, and one of my privileges as a consultant is I meet a lot of companies, and it's uncanny to see, and funny at times to see that the leaders of organizations point out that, look, hey guys, we need to manage our time for women and for men and everyone alike. Yet they're talking about this at late hours and sending mails at beyond office hours and so on. So
Right.
so they're not living, not necessarily walking the talk. So that's the other area they got to work at. So really think about this idea about how do we incorporate the flex ways of working, in the organization, embed it in true sense,
Yeah.
incorporate it. I think that's an area that organizations
So
need to
in,
work in.
in, in some way, we have not moved far from the early days of industrialization, where seeing somebody working or seeing someone at the workplace is perceived as work, which was relevant maybe in a factory setup
Right.
at the shop floor.
Yeah.
But now it's not that. So you can work from anywhere. All of us know the fact that somebody is sitting there, they could be on social media whole day and start work after office hours.
Yeah.
But subconsciously, people who work long hours are kept on a pedestal.
Yeah.
So it's a cultural change that is required.
It is a cultural change.
And even in terms of flex work that you talked about earlier, when women are given these flex options, somewhere it is made to look like a favor. So, woman who needs this is hesitant because she does not want to be perceived as somebody who is taking a favor.
Right.
So, in today's context, everybody, man and woman, equally, everybody is struggling with the so called balancing work and home, but it hits the woman harder. And
Yeah.
so, maybe this flex arrangements is something which should be made available, and increasingly men should also take it, so
Yeah.
that unfortunately that is how it is, for it to be seen normal maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, when men take it and then women also take it, maybe it is much more easier for everyone to digest.
Yeah. One aspect that I want to talk about, and being the first male to have come on your show, is that there is a whole series of conversations that companies have done with the men folk as well. The stretch that during this pandemic is at workplace is equally felt by men, though the
Right.
home environment is easier for them than women. And this started happening even before the pandemic hit, right? This sense of even men feeling that, look, this whole idea of working 24/7 literally, to grow up in a career is actually quite challenging for them as well. So I think this idea of needing flex is felt by both the genders at workplace.
Correct.
However, there is a challenge of men that much more, because they ought to, again, social norming, they ought to look like the ones who can take the bullet, right? They ought to
Right.
be able to travel to distant places, and they ought to be able to work long hours. And if you're single, then you have to make sure that you're working weekends as well. I mean, these are some norms that, again, has always been on top of on a male,
Yeah.
and that is also a source of bias for the men themselves, because they believe
Correct.
if that's right, then it ought to operate for women as well.
Correct.
And I think that's the so somewhere in this change in ways of working is to be able to help both the men and women see the what really creates success at work,
Correct.
and it's not long hours, for sure, right?
Yeah. Somewhere, not seeing it only from what is for women kind of a thing, but how do we change the overall culture,
Yeah,
regardless of men and women, and in the process makes it easier for the women.
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
And I'm very curious at this point of time about what is being discussed abroad about working from near home.
Right.
Somehow it looks very attractive. It seems to be the best of both worlds, especially for women,
Right.
that they go to some place which is near home, so it saves the commute, etc. What do you say? They do not get bogged down by running the home when they are working. So, for example, what I could sense, if the survey, if it were to be converted as stories, if women were talking, maybe they would say, okay, if me and my husband are working, doorbell rings, then I have to take. If the milkman comes, I have to answer. If
Right.
the household help comes, if the child cries, you can go on with the reasons. But what I'm trying to say is a work from near home as a concept.
Right.
Monish, do you think India is prepared for something like that? Do you think organizations are considering that?
So organizations are certainly considering it, and if you walk into companies today, as we speak, one big question they're all trying to answer is the coming back, because now vaccines, people are getting vaccinated, and we are creating a positive environment as far as the health is concerned. So it's a matter of time companies would need to look at how do we open up, and the broad questions on their mind is that what will help us to get the best out of our workforce, given that we have had a learning in the pandemic. So there were some clear learnings in the pandemic that we can operate lot, significant part of our work. I mean, forget the manufacturing side per se, but any corporate or a planning or a thinking kind of work can be done remotely. This is the
Right.
first time that the corporate world recognized, when they knew it theoretically. But this is a big learning, right? So they certainly see a value of how can we use remote working, right, as a way to provide that environment. It is good news from money point of view, because we would spend less in the infrastructure and cost, etc.
Right.
The other side that is on their mind, which is also very strongly on them, is that, look, not every job can be done remotely. right?
Right.
So we would need some of the people in the office or in a place where they could work together. Manufacturing is one example I took, but there are other roles as well, for example,
Right.
in sales and so on. Now, so the question then becomes that, are we ready to provide a distributed policy for people that if you're doing this job, I'm sorry, you have to come to work. And if you're doing this job, you can operate from wherever you like, right?
Right.
Which never happened before, right? Before
True.
was everybody came to work, and so this differentiated view to to jobs is an important consideration on the mind. That are we ready to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so these two big considerations, and then of course there are concerns of risk. And you would know this better than I do, by way of security of systems. You will be operating your laptop from a remote setup.
Right.
Who are you with, etc., etc. Right?
Hmm.
So all of those consideration become an important aspect as well, though they are not deal breakers per se. It's more a solution of those, but certainly that's on the mind, and especially that some jobs are have high demand for security, or, from cyber and all that point of view.
Right.
So with these, I think there is the near working from near home is one such option that has emerged for many companies. Some companies have their own offices, which is, for example, Deloitte. We have offices in Bombay, for example, right? I mean, people can work from our Kandivali office, or rather, Goregaon office, or from the town office, depending on where they are, and you could just plug in and work, and that was anyway happening for us.
Yeah.
Similarly, other companies were, many companies were thinking about that. But there is a fair amount of work that is being done in terms of providing men and women opportunities to work from remote centers, which they could take on board. The other reality, which is again companies are thinking about, is that a lot of the younger workforce who were kind of forced to live in a metro, in a cramped one bedroom, two bedroom apartment, sharing with other people. I mean, you know they have decided that, look, might as well go back to our hometowns and
Right.
operate from there because it's cheaper. So organizations thinking that maybe that work distant could even operate, that maybe can they operate from remote there, and we could create opportunities for them to come to work few days a month, and operate from there. So there's a real conversation happening around thinking how to use the benefit of remote working,
Remote
both from
working.
near home, and as well as from remote, if you like, and
Yeah.
that is
Near native place kind of.
near native places, right? And there is a significant number on it.
Yeah.
One good thing I think that is will push this to the favor of employees, and that's my prediction or my sense, is that the competition for talent, right,
Yeah.
will push companies to find ways to maximize for employees, right? And which is in a good state in India. I think in every sector we are seeking better and better talent, and to attract them. So I certainly see that companies would look at some form that would be very attractive by way of providing remote working, and yet solving for the fact that some jobs need to be near, as well as some jobs, or all jobs rather, require some sense of bonhomie, working together, the sense of culture you get when you work
Correct.
together in one place. So they will try and mix that with the idea of remote. But it's an exciting time to see that the whole workplace design is
Yeah.
likely to change the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, so that means it makes it very interesting for women. So, and for listeners, see, most often as women, we hold back. We think our constraints are like mine alone kind of constraints. We discuss in hushed tones and we choose to leave the workforce, which is what the survey was also talking about. But what Mohnish is saying is interesting because every organization is going to have lot of options because the way in which the organizations are going to realize that the way they can hold on to talent, good talent, is by facilitating flex in whatever ways it works for that person. So the woman who is at the hard end of things now should understand, even before that default decision to quit, saying that, let me explore.
Yeah.
We need not be apologetic about the constraints. If the constraint is about baby care, the constraint is about travel, the constraint is about timings, the constraint is about the culture, you can choose, find out. Every organization is in a state of flux now.
Yeah.
And you need not be ashamed to talk about this, and you need not see these as constraints, actually.
Yeah.
Correct. So I feel that is a big shift. The fact that we accept these are problems everybody goes through, and there is a need to accommodate and figure out what works.
Yeah.
Good. The shift is towards looking at employee wellness.
Yeah.
Inadequate focus on employee wellness means it's a problem more for the woman, but the focus needs to be on employee wellness in general.
Yeah.
And do you think there will be more options for women, especially? So I am referring to the famous Sheryl Sandberg's book of Leaning In,
Right.
where women, actually the problem is that they want to lean into work at some points of time. They want to lean into their home related responsibilities at certain points of their life.
Yeah.
Right. And do you see organizations becoming more and more open to this and facilitating training and mentorship, not just for women, but also for men around, in terms of this is a new culture that
Yeah.
Indians will have to figure out. Indians, especially because our notions or social norms are different. So, do you see any kind of training, mentoring, and schemes being identified in this area? Well, that's an interesting question to explore. And with that question, we come to end of part 1 of this episode. Do subscribe to get notified on part 2, where we will explore the response to this question and also examine others. Like, what do organizations do for women who are not keen on leadership roles and who are not in the childbirth window of life? Are most organizations focusing on these two areas only? Would there be boundaries around work hours? Is it possible? What is the message to women? And I bet it is a very interesting message. So don't forget to listen to part 2. Until the next episode, it is bye from me, Krishna. Remember, you are what you want to be, and the time starts now.